All right. Hello, viewers. We're here with the second presentation in our Building Better Relationships panel series. This one's focusing on early dating. My name is Kyle Justin. I am a doctoral student who's working at UM-Dearborn's CAPS for my practicum. I'm leading this panel, I guess. And I'm joined here by my co-hosts.
My name is Courtney. I'm an undergraduate at UM-Dearborn, working with CAPS as a peer educator.
Hi everyone, my name is Grace. I am a senior at the University of Michigan-Dearborn, and I am also a peer educator with CAPS.
Hello, I am also an undergrad. My name is Dale, and I am also a peer educator with CAPS.
All right. So with that, is presented by CAPS and CSJI. Do you want to give them a shout out before I totally forget? But yeah, with that out of the way, we can get started. So as I mentioned, my PowerPoint's not working. There we go. Not too far. Okay. So as I mentioned, we were focusing on early dating and early relationships for this panel in particular, since that's I think an issue most people can relate to at some point in their life, at least. So the first topic we wanted to have today was, how to express romantic interest effectively. And I think the first point to bring up is that there's no one right way to do this. But there are some common unhelpful strategies that a lot of people fall into, and we wanted to elucidate and expand on some of those strategies and why they're unhelpful, as well as provide some better alternatives. So I think the first one we want to start with is directness and the pros and cons of being direct when expressing romantic interest.
Yeah, so with the directness, I think just like avoiding any confusion is going to be your best bet. Having clarity is better than not having clarity, because then it just can leave the other person confused, and it can leave you confused and frustrated with the situation. So it's important to just be direct and set boundaries and like know what you're doing. Basically, everyone's on the same page.
Yeah, I agree. And then also with that, like, just make sure you're not hounding a person. So being too direct is also a problem. Like, make sure you are respecting the other person's space as well as your space, because it's one thing from being direct and completely like just over bombarding the person, not everyone like answers quickly. And we kind of talked about that in the last presentation. So make sure like you're finding that nice, even balance and like kind of matching the person's energy.
It's also important to sort of word your how you express your romantic interest. It's good to choose your words carefully. So especially in like a friendship, refrain from expressing that you've been interested in a person for like a long time or forever, because that sort of gives the other person the impression that you were just friends with them because you had romantic interest in them, even if that isn't true.
Yeah, all very good points. And like, it's one of the difficulties with directness, and why I think it's important to expand on it, is because we can say like be direct, but it also needs to be kind of succinct, like to the point. If you're expressing interest in someone, it should be like, hey, I would like to see where this goes. I'm interested in you. Maybe like, do you want to go see a movie or something like that? It doesn't need to be this avalanche of emotions. And as Grace said, like, it needs to be respectful. That is like vitally important. Matching someone's energy is kind of it's a really good way to put it. And it's unfortunate it's a little vague, because you do need to be able to read where the other person's at. But generally, like, if you're being direct and polite and succinct, people will help you out a bit on that, even if it is just to say like, yeah, no thanks. That's okay. You know, it's useful information.
Yeah, I think that maybe like don't go straight out with declarations of love. Maybe start small. Maybe start with, hey, do you want to go out sometime? And then maybe build into that, hey, like I really like you. Don't just out of the blue text or tell them, hey, I've been in love with you for a long time, because that's usually a turnoff for the other person.
Yeah. I think that's a universal, well, not entirely universal, but a lot of people experience someone coming on so strong that their response is immediately like, yeah, okay, no, I need some space, even if before that, maybe they would have been open to such a thing before, you know, they experienced something that was really overwhelming there. But I do want to build on one of the elements, like when you want to, you know, pay someone some kind of compliment, or like I express I really like you, and perhaps not use such vague terms. I think a useful thing is like aiming that compliment at an element of personal expression. So like, there's a few good reasons for this, but generally personal expression says something the person wants to put out there. You know, if someone does something with their hair that you think is like attractive or interesting, being able to like comment and say like, hey, you know, I think this looks really good on you. Like that's a better thing than just coming on to someone with like, say, trying to think of a polite way to be crass, and that's kind of difficult. But you know, just more of like a comment about someone's like skin tone or eye shape or something like that, which can be read negatively in a lot of ways.
I think when we were preparing for this, somebody said something about like, don't comment on things that the person like cannot change about themselves. I can't remember who said that, but somebody did, and it was a really good point. Dale, thank you.
Yes. Yeah, really. Beyond that, I just think most people like, if they do something to express themselves, having it remarked on positively is generally just, you know, a nice experience. You know, I personally think that when people are like, oh, hey, Kyle, I like your glasses. It's like, oh, thanks. I picked them out myself. Yeah.
Yeah, you can't tell from my lighting, but I dye my hair a kind of strange color. And so I get complimented on that a lot, which is fine. But what isn't fine is if people were complimenting, like, I don't know, my body, I would be a little uncomfortable. And saying, oh, I really like your hair, I really love that color, is way different from your eyes are just so pretty. Because sometimes that gets a little awkward.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's also important to note, like, not give people backhanded compliments when expressing romantic interest. Because the big thing that like I see in the comments of like TikTok, or it hasn't happened to me personally, but someone might be like, oh, I love like how confident you are about your body. Like just going back to what you said, like don't compliment someone's body. Like that could be seen like as a backhanded compliment, because like I shouldn't be confident about my body. So I think that's just like important to know, like with romantic interest, just like kind of be straightforward and not really talk about like physical attributions, but instead things that like kind of like make a person, like with their personality.
Yeah, and I guess I want to make the one thing about this clear, because I know a lot of this, often the framing for these types of compliments is like guys saying something to a girl they're interested in this manner, but like it is not such a limited perspective. Like, guys like getting compliments too, and to go into my field for a second, there's a growing trend where guys are becoming more concerned about things like appearance or the impressions they're making in a way that's really raising anxiety around this. And so it's something that, like, well, you may not assume that a guy would take this in such a negative way, like a backhanded compliment or something. The research shows that that's not true. You know, guys might not express it very well, but they like compliments, and they feel bad when they get complimented or objectified, just the same as, you know, like well, really anyone might. It's kind of a universal thing that's just off-putting. But we've talked a lot about how to express romantic interest in a more general sense. I think now it'd be good to move on to, assuming I can get my PowerPoint to go forward, how to like ask someone out on a date more specifically. You know, the really scary part, I think, of this interaction where, you know.
So, jumping off, I think Dale said it again, but in the last section, like there's something like super like casual, like again, it's not like a big like declaration of like love or anything like that. Like it can be as simple as like, oh, like, do you want to go to the movies or something? And like it doesn't have to be, I mean, you want to make sure that like both people know that it's a date, but like it doesn't have to be like a huge thing, you know?
Yeah, very much. The phrase we came up with in our prep session was like casual but clear, because oh, you're getting to know someone early on, you're exploring whether or not this is what you want. It doesn't need to be like, ah, yes, I'm taking you to like a restaurant and then we're going to go to like a movie. And it's going to be like an entire day's worth of activities. Like it can be more chill, like, hey, do you want to like grab a coffee and talk for, you know, a half hour or whatever. But at the same time, you do want to make very clear that it's, you know, you're exploring a romantic interest here, because I don't think anyone benefits from hinting. I just want to put that out there. Like, even if both people are on the same page, that can lead to the situation where no one's taking that next step. It's just frustrating. Like hints at best take weeks. Directly asking takes minutes.
I think that's really hard too, because a lot of time, like in rom-coms and like romantic movies, it's always seen as like such a big gesture, and like sometimes that people think that's the direction that you have to go. But especially like if you've never talked to that person, or you know, you just like you haven't reached that level of comfortable ability with that person, you want to like kind of start off small, like the PowerPoints were saying, and how Courtney was saying, and making sure that you're kind of like clear where you're at and like what stage of the relationship you're on, and just making sure that like both parties are comfortable and not just springing a date onto someone.
Yeah, I really like that language choice. You don't want to spring a date on someone. Like tentative, being open to, you know, some kind of, I mean, even a collaborative approach. So like asking if someone would like to do something and putting the ball in their court for like, you know, a time frame can be a helpful way to not make it feel quite as like high pressure. This would be my way of thinking about it.
You could also sort of like, instead of just going out there with, hey, do you want to go out like as a couple? Like if you've never hung out with this person before, maybe like inviting them with a group of people, and like not like as a date, but really to just get to know them better, and see if there's like chemistry, really like sort of figure out what the relationship is before just sort of springing right into, hey, do you want to go out with me?
Yeah, it's a really good point. You don't need to jump immediately to like, you know, expressing a big romantic interest even. Because I wrote here, early dating is about finding out if this is something you both want, but you can do a little bit of exploration before that, where you're like, hey, let's, you know, are you going to this big event that other people are going to? Like, let's go do something as a group, see if it's like, oh yeah, I'd like to get to know you one-on-one. I mean, you could even ask someone to hang out one-on-one specifically for the purposes of getting to know them better. It doesn't have to be like a clear date in this sense. If it's like, hey, you know, I'd like to talk to you, find out if one-on-one we still, you know, click decently. And even then, like an early, what's a date can be kind of variable, I think, depending on the background someone comes from. So yeah, I'm getting a bit ahead of myself, so I'll move on to the next slide. But clarification is always your friends. Oh, Click actually took us forward. Cool. So moving directly into that, early communication and boundaries. So like making sure you're on the same page for what a relationship is, which really kind of got to here, like being able to clarify if you're moving into like romantic interest versus a friendship, and really being able to take the step to just say like, hey, this is what I'm thinking, or this is what I'm interested in. Where are you on this?
I think that goes right along with the whole hint thing of just how that doesn't work like at all. And so like it's just super important to ask for clarification as to like where the other person is feeling or like where they're at in your relationship. Or if they even like want to continue the relationship. Like it's just important to like be on the same page, because if you're both just like dropping hints to each other, like it's just going to end in confusion.
I like how you said, Kyle, too, that a date can mean different things to many people, like different people, not even like a relationship, like just a date in general. So I think it's important, when asking a person out, being clear that, I would like this to be a date rather than just like a hangout. So both parties are like clear what's going on, because, if one person just wants to hang out, but not necessarily like have it be a date, and the other person doesn't have like that impression, it can get really confusing. So I think just like going back to the key point of being clear and open in their communication, where you can ask, is this a date, and how do we want to see this moving on in the future?
Yeah, and I really like that future-oriented element there, since it's important to clarify like what your goal is in going on a date. Like some people just want to casually date. Some people might be looking for, something more long-term. Both are fine, but if you're not on the same page, it can lead to trouble.
Yeah, I think there's nothing wrong with going into a relationship and not wanting a monogamous romantic relationship. Like that's fine. We have situationships on here, as some people call them, which situationships can be fine, but I don't think that anyone really gets into a situationship and wants it to stay like that.
Yeah, like, I mean, it is important to include like, a non-monogamous dating relationship, like friends with benefits, even just like a romantic but non-sexual relationship. These are all fine options as long as everyone is on the same page and agreed to it. It's like, I think the big issue of the situationship is the ambiguity. And like at some point, you're gonna clarify that one way or another. Like even like ghosting someone is a clarification, technically. It's a pretty unpleasant clarification, I'd say, but it does need to happen at some point. And if you can, verbally do this in person over 2 minutes and find out if that's going to be something you want to stick with or something you want to cut off at this point for it to be more unpleasant, then hey, that's a win for everyone. Which I guess brings me to like my last point, is the accept the answers you receive. We're going to talk about this more in depth later, but it is, I'm trying to like debate someone into changing their answer on this stuff. It's not cool for a lot of reasons, and it doesn't endear you to a person. Like no one's happy about someone who's trying to convince them to have different feelings. So
yeah, and this also gets into like why situationships are usually bad, because it's usually because both of the people are on the same page, and so one person is probably going to get rejected and probably going to get hurt, and it's a part of being in relationships with other people. It's going to happen, and when a situationship is clarified, you just have to accept the answer that you're receiving.
mm-hmm. Yeah, and I guess now I have a later slide for that, so I'll have to hold off on it. Moving on. Rejecting someone politely. And I do think just rejection in general is a big part of early dating. Like once you've gone on a couple dates and you're in a relationship, that's, you know, that's a different panel, a different presentation anyway. But like rejection is always fear around early dating, even if it doesn't specifically come to pass in any instance. So I think we need to give time to both how to reject someone and how to handle rejection. But starting with this, like I use the term politely here because I hate the term polite. Like there's a personal grudge against that word because it's often directly like it's a loaded term, but I also think it includes a lot of unfair expectations for the person who's doing the rejecting. Anyone want to take a crack at some of them? I know we've chatted about them before. I feel like I'm talking too much right now, though.
I think mainly in terms of polite is like, don't be malicious or vindictive about rejecting somebody, or even like making fun of them for liking you, which is pretty like bare minimum. Like just be a good person. Don't insult them when you're rejecting them or like mock them, is really what that means. Because that's just not a good thing to do in any context.
I think that like being polite in like a lot of situations like this means like, I'm trying to like word this in a good way, but like sparing someone's feelings, and that's fine to do like to an extent, but you're also fully entitled to just say like, no, I don't want to do this, and like that's enough. Like you don't necessarily need an explanation of why. It just no is no, and like that's that. So it's like that in itself, like it's hard because once again, I feel like being polite kind of means like not coddling the person, but trying to make them feel better about the situation. And like honestly, like you don't necessarily need to do that.
Yeah, maybe that's closer to what I was trying to say. Like when you're not attracted to somebody, you're just not attracted to them. They don't need to know the specifics why, like, oh, well, like, I really hate how you look or something like that. Like refrain from that. You can just leave it at, I'm just not attracted to you. I'm sorry.
Exactly. Like I totally agree with you were saying, like, you don't have to be mean about it. Like that's probably a no-no, but like you also don't have to be like overly kind and accommodating toward them.
I like how you said like don't coddle the person, because I think that's what we typically think about when we like hear the term polite, and just that often like leads for room for like the person to keep asking you out and like to keep bothering you. And in that point, that's when you do kind of like have to step away from the politeness and then realize like it's okay, which we kind of go through this later, like with rejection, we're going to talk about it. But like at that point, if the person keeps harassing you, I think it's okay to like block them or start to ghost them. Especially like if they keep harassing you and you did it politely. But yeah, I think also just going back to the original topic of how to reject someone politely, I also think it's important to do it in private. Because like I know sometimes a lot of people like to do it out in the open, but I don't, that just is really disrespectful to me. So I definitely think like the privacy and intimacy is important in rejecting someone too.
Yeah, having it shows some respect, not make it everyone's business. And I do think, yeah, like bare minimum, you know, don't be directly hostile when rejecting someone, but like you do not need to justify a rejection. And you know, we can prove this very simply. Like I imagine everyone who's here, everyone who's watching this, has seen multiple people who are of, you know, a group they are attracted to, whether that's like by gender, like whatever your sexual orientation would lead you to be attracted to. But you don't find every person of that sexual orientation immediately attractive at the same level. Like I have met a lot of women over the course of my life because half the population are women. I am not interested in dating every woman I've met. I don't need to explain that. It's just how things work. So I think often there's this idea, and usually I think it's unfairly pushed onto women that like they need to spare the feelings of someone who's asked them out, when really just saying like, no, thank you, I'm not interested, is sufficient. And I know Grace mentioned like being able to, set a harsh boundary of even like, cutting someone off if they keep asking you. I do want to like reinforce that is entirely appropriate. People are not entitled to your time, and if they are refusing to respect a boundary, you may just need to say like, all right, I'm not going to be around you at all then. Like, you are responsible for your feelings and your actions, but other people have to manage their own, which we'll get to. I guess the only other point I'd want to highlight, there's often this idea that politeness involves like, and it goes back to like the coddling of like, oh, it's not you, it's me, or it's some kind of framing that makes it like a, I'm just not in a place for a relationship right now. Things that could potentially leave a door open. That's, I would argue, actually not very polite. Like one of the nicest things you can do in a rejection is be like clear and firm, so that the other person can know what's up, and however they have to deal with it, they can at least understand the situation properly. I know a common thing is when people feel like they got a rejection that was half-hearted, they're like, well, does that mean there's a chance? We don't want to encourage that. It's not good for anyone. So if you're going to leave a door open, make sure you mean to leave the door open. Yeah. So let's take us to the other half of the equation, which is how do you handle rejection gracefully? I guess I want to say the first thing is that rejection sucks. Like, it's not fun. I have not met any person who has ever been rejected and been like, yeah, that was a great experience that I immediately appreciated on a personal level. Often there's benefits to it after the fact. It helps you better clarify relationships with people, learn how to interact with people, but at the time it's painful. And that's okay. You can be frustrated, you can be sad, you can be a bit angry about it. You just have to deal with those feelings on your own. They're not the job of the other person to manage.
One of the things that I wrote down here is that I know we just said like the whole like it's not you, it's me thing like isn't the best way to go, but I feel like in handling rejection, like it's how they feel about you like isn't necessarily about you as a person, unless you've like done something to like, if you keep pursuing them after they said no or something like that, like it's really like it's about them and their standards and their attractions, and not necessarily like your personal faults. Like it's not like a hit. I mean, it can be a hit to your self-esteem, but not like that,
Mm.
I mean, just echoing like what you both said, rejection is really just such a common thing that humans have to go through. Not even like romantic rejection, like you get rejected from jobs, you get rejected from your friends, family. I mean, it's just like something you have to deal with. So not saying that it's obviously easy for everyone. It's something you have to work through and like find how you can work through it, which is why Caps is here. But I just think taking time to process your emotions and reaching out to people like you love and like in tune with yourself to figure out like how you want to move through with that rejection. But just going back to like, it's not up to the person you're rejecting to like try to handle that for you. That's something like that you kind of have to work through yourself, or like reach out to someone else, like a loved one or a CAPS professional.
Yeah, like loved ones, friends, it's okay to go and vent to them or to talk about this. It's really perfectly natural. I think a lot of people want to do some processing after something like this happens, and that's okay. It's just making sure that you're not trying to either put it on the person who just handed you the rejection, or someone who, well, like trying to get them to change their answer. which is just no.
And yeah, like if you're feeling a lot of emotions about rejection, you're probably valid in those emotions. You're probably not being over dramatic. It's not abnormal to be really torn apart by rejection. They can be incredibly triggering for like underlying issues. And like, not to say that the other person needs to look out for that. Like, that's not something that they would even know necessarily, but that, like, you know, that maybe that means that you just need to work on yourself. Like, you might not even know that there's these underlying issues that are making rejection triggering for you, which is the main reason why like CAPS is on this slide. Like working through that with somebody, and trying to get to the root of why it brought so much emotions about.
So before I move on, I do want to once again like highlight what Courtney had said earlier about how like if you're getting rejected, it's probably actually not about you, like, in the sense that, you know, whether or not a person likes you or not often doesn't have all that much to do with like a conscious effort on their part. You know, you don't choose who you find attractive. But it's important to know that also what people find attractive varies a lot and often doesn't really make all that much like sense if you're to try and if you ask someone like to explain why they find something attractive, you're eventually going to hit a wall where you're just getting answers that are like, I don't know, I just think they're cool. And it's important to know that just because someone you think is cool doesn't think you're cool doesn't mean other people are going to have the same opinion. Like, people are weird. I guess that's the key point. And that's, I would say, not even just okay, but a good thing. Like, you know, it can feel kind of frustrating to hear, but there's plenty of fish in the sea kind of deal.
I think that this gets brought up a lot with like people who are like bi or pansexual, that like, oh, well, they're attracted to everyone, so why aren't they attracted to me? So calling them out like that is, first of all, incredibly problematic. And second, there's a difference between finding somebody like objectively attractive versus I want to pursue a romantic relationship with this person. Like, they might think that you're good looking and objectively attractive, but that doesn't mean that they want to be in a relationship with you.
Very much so. Like, oh, go Chris.
Oh, I was gonna say that was well worded. Like, there's a difference between like being attracted or like attracted to the person, or you find them like just attracted. I think I read that right. But yeah, just if everyone was attracted to everybody in the world, that would like literally be impossible. So just when just recognizing that like it's okay if someone isn't like attracted to you. There's plenty of fish in the sea, like you said, Kyle. But yeah, I really like what you said, Gail, about like how especially like with bi people or pan people, it doesn't mean like they're attracted to everyone, but like that's kind of like another conversation.
Yeah, I really do appreciate that, though, because it is kind of a weird double standard where like we don't, well, at base, I would assume most straight people realize that not every person of the opposite gender is someone they're attracted to just categorically. So holding like bi or pan people to that standard is just like weird. It does not track. So very useful addition. Thank you for that. All right. So more specific conversation about persistence here, and then just one more topic to go. So we're winding down a bit. These are kind of related, but I guess I want to really just dig into some of the reasons why persistence is such a toxic thing in, you know, these situations. Like, why, despite it being a cultural like touchstone, like I'm confident everyone here has watched some media where a character gets rejected and the response is to just continually like keep asking, and eventually that's just the right thing. It is rewarded with a positive, happy relationship. And that's just not how things work out in the real world. So I think it's important to really take time to like highlight why that is.
I mean, like you said earlier, Kyle, it's like if someone says no and like you keep persisting, like it doesn't endear you to the person like at all. Like it's gonna push you away further. Like it's not a great situation.
Yeah, I think that in a lot of things, the advice that you're often given is like, if at first you don't succeed, try again. That doesn't apply to relationships. That's more of like skills, not relationships with other people.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was this is like back with the rom-com example. I know like in romance movies, like the guy will continuously like keep asking the girl out, and then like eventually like she'll cave in and say yes. And like at some point that reaches a level of assault or just like coercion. So like recognizing that like that's taking place, and like even if you need to like ask someone else like, do you think this is okay? Do you think this is healthy? That's not like a healthy relationship, even if they were your friend before. So even if they were your friend before, I think it's okay to like block the person and say enough is enough. And it's really like hitting that level of like assault or like coercion.
Yeah. There's a fundamental lack of respect for another person's autonomy as a human being who's equal to you in like persistence. It's really, you have to reject their wishes to be able to continue doing this. And I mean, even in a case where someone leaves a door open, like in some way, and you can arguably read like, okay, like they clearly said like, I'm not ready now, but maybe later. Like they get to be the one who decides maybe later. You need to be willing to respect the other person as a human being. And despite it being like a common idea that's thrown around, like it's pretty harmful because it fundamentally dehumanizes one person in the relationship or the potential relationship. So yeah, as Grace said, like it's coercive, it's can be abusive, and it's a crime in some situations.
Kind of jumping off what Grace said. I'm sorry, Dale. Just like something that I've seen like come up, like I've witnessed it happen to like friends and stuff, is the like weaponization of mental health issues. So it's kind of like persistence in the fact that it's like, if you don't do this, I'm going to be depressed, or you're going to make this worse for me, or something like that. So it's like putting it on the other person, which is not their responsibility at all. And so that's just something that I wanted to bring up because I've seen it happen before.
No, I was thinking that early in the presentation, but like it didn't kind of fit in. But definitely like when people say like, oh, I want to date because, I'll be lonely, or like it'll make me like so sad or depressed, how you were saying. And I think even in those instances, it's okay to still say no to the person. And it's not your like responsibility to quote unquote fix them. I hate using that term, but and also like bringing back to the person, like if you're the one that's doing that and like kind of weaponizing it, then making sure that, try to receive help from CAPS or family, friends, but someone that's outside the person you're asking out.
Yeah, that actually kind of relates to what I was going to say, because like we just haven't touched on it, that like when you are rejected by somebody, especially like if you were friends before, that they don't owe you a relationship. Like if they were like really uncomfortable with what you did, then they don't owe you to continue even a platonic relationship. And that's just how it is. So like if someone closes the door on that relationship, it's also bad to persist in a platonic way.
Yeah, exactly. It is really important to take what people say and like respect their wishes. Like no means no. So this does somewhat segue into the other topic I wanted to get on here, and I forgot to make a slide for this one because I'm just not on top of my life apparently. But it's how to handle uh, romance, persistence, really any of the stuff with someone you had a previously established relationship with. So like, what if you have a friend who later on you're like, oh, I actually like this friend in a different way? Like, what do you do? How do you handle that? And what is the way to approach it?
I mean, I think it kind of circles back to the things that we talked about, like being direct, being casual about it. But at the same time, if they say no, they're not interested, I think you have to decide for yourself, like, can I continue this relationship without being resentful or like hoping for more? Or do I just kind of need to walk away? And like on the other side of that, if this person like makes you uncomfortable or keeps persisting, like you have the right to be like, I'm not sure if I want to engage in this relationship anymore.
Yeah, this also goes back to like what I said at the beginning of the presentation. Like, if you were in a relationship, a platonic relationship, but you were only in it for romantic reasons to get to that end goal, then that's a no. Don't do that. And then if you do that, they do not owe you a relationship after that because you've broke that trust.
Yeah, breaking that trust is, I really think, the important point to get to. And it's one of the reasons why like being direct and casual, because you can in fact, there's a lot of people who like someone for a lot longer, like a lot of time before they ask someone out, because it's scary, it can be nerve-wracking. You can be like, I've been interested in this person for a month and I've just now worked up the courage to ask. You don't need to tell them all of those details. And it is possible to be a genuine friend to someone and then develop romantic feelings later on. But how you frame that and the way you talk about it is, well, it can imply you're only there because you're interested in someone for a romantic or sexual relationship, which is off-putting. Like, people like their friends because their friends like them for the person they are. And you want to make sure that you're highlighting that, even if you're like, hey, we've been friends for a while, but I think I'd like to try, if you were open to it, like I'd like to see if something more would happen. Is that cool? Like, it doesn't need to be a big thing. And as long as you can, take their answer for what it is, and both of you are fine with it, you can still be platonically friends after you ask someone out and get rejected. It's not a guarantee, and it's not always the easiest thing, but it is doable. It's worth highlighting. So there's often this concern about ruining friendships, which isn't entirely ill-founded, but I think sometimes it's talked about as an inevitability when it really depends on like how well you can manage the emotions that'll come up and how well you can handle like the changes in a relationship that can come with talking about romance or sexuality or whatnot, or pursuing these things, I should say. So that's all of the points I had written out, but I do want to open up the floor with our last bit of time, see if there's anything else anyone feels is important to add that we missed or didn't get to.
I guess we didn't say like how to reach out to CAPS.
Oh, that is important. Oh God, I should have really prepared for that, because I just know we're on the top floor of the university center. Can't really miss it. You go up the stairs. It's kind of on the right, but there's signs. we're always happy to have new people come in. And if you're not sure if like it's caps worthy, whatever you want to come in for, just come in and ask. We'll talk you through it. It's really low key, I promise.
And just to add, like CAPS has like licensed therapists and like everything is confidential. So
Yeah.
want to throw that in there.
Yes, confidential. We are licensed, some of us anyway. Not everyone who works at CAPS, the therapist, is licensed. I should clarify. My license is just limited currently, so working on it. Anyway, I'll stop talking before I continue to say more bizarre, awkward non sequiturs. Thank you for watching, and I hope you have a great day. And of course,